Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions. Congressman Frank.
On the question of where this regulation ought to be, I am struck by this. I have to say, we have a serious problem here. Dr. will know, obviously, I believe, but the contrast between her statement of almost self-congratulation and what we hear from everybody else is stark. I mean, the industry's hurting and she's cheering. She cherry-picked the statistic. When we said this to her, she has still been here. You know, Senator Brown talked about changing. Most federal agencies are somewhat advocates of the people in their name. The Veterans Administration, Department of Veterans Affairs, the Small Business Administration, the Department of Agriculture, they're pro-farmer. The Veterans Affairs Department is pro-veteran. The Labor Department, even in a Republican administration, would have a good relationship with labor. And a Democratic administration, Congress, is supposed to have a good administration with business. This is, I think there are only two regulatory agencies I can think of that have a genuinely sort of hostile attitude toward the people under their control. The National Marine Fishery Service and the Drug Enforcement Administration, because there's almost the same degree of guilt on the part of them towards the fishermen as there was in the DEA, the drug dealers. And it's really very striking, and it undermines, again, we're a free society. You are not going to enforce everything. You need to have some cooperation. And I will say again, we have asked Dr. Kennedy to take the lead in this, that the Coast Guard Administrative Law Judges not be the ones adjudicating Coast Guard prosecution. And Commerce promised us they would change that. They haven't. We have to get back to them. I know we have the Secretary who moved, but that has to be done. Let me now ask Mr. Welsh. You suggested a strong question. You said one of the agencies got up at the council and talked about the influence over council decisions. What agency?
Environmental Defense.
Well, I think that's a very important point to make. Let me ask also, and by the way, I think they have been wrong in the past about some of these issues, including, as I said, the scholar issue. But the key here is the amount of fish that can be caught. And it's overwhelmingly clear to me when we talk about every decision that is made. This is why I say it has the same relationship to fishermen, the DEA, the drug dealers. Every decision is made with the interest of the fishermen almost considered to be adversarial. It's to let's make sure that there are enough fish so that we get this point where, one, we acknowledge that the science is good, but with that we take, as Ms. Keating brought out in this questioning, the most restrictive of the possible alternatives, even though it's probably outdated. Secondly, since that consistently leads to quota not being used, we limit the amount of quota we can reuse. I don't understand that. You're stuck with the 10% in the council, and you didn't change it, and the next year you expected it to be less. Had there been, I'm sorry, I misstated you?
I don't expect it to be less than 10% quota.
No, you expect that to be less unused catch.
Right.
So, yes, I understand that. What that suggests to me is that the 10% was unnecessarily rigid. Let me ask you, if the 10% had been 20% last time, would that have had any deleterious effect on the fishery? Suppose instead of keeping it at 10%, the council voted to go 20 or 25. Would that now have had any deleterious effects on the fishery?
I don't have the information.
All right, well, I have to find out. My impression is the answer is obviously no, because if it were going to happen, you might have had a worse situation. And we have got to stop putting the reflex is, let's say no. The reflex is, let's not have a catch. And that's especially the case with, look, and I am proud of my environmental record, we're not talking about permanently fouling anything. We're not talking about people dying from bad air or being poisoned by bad water. We're talking about the rate at which fish reproduce themselves. And we pluck this arbitrary 10-year number out of the air and put it into the statute. No one will defend that 10 years as scientifically valid. They say it's valid because it's in the statute. We ask people like Dr. Pacheco, we help to change the statute. The answer is no. But then, with this, and yeah, I agree. And by the way, the fishermen agree. I don't know a single fisherman who wants to be the last person to fish. I don't know a single fisherman who doesn't hope the fishing will go on for generations. So they want the fish to reproduce. But we take this arbitrary case of, not arbitrary, but inexact issue about reproduction. We freeze it at 10 years, and we freeze it here, and we freeze it there. Let me ask all of you, if we were to, and I think this is critical, First of all, we say the quote, we should not say 10%. Coming out and say, I hope very much the council will be willing to change that. A council which is going to stick with that rigid 10% figure, which no one justifies in scientific terms, will make me even more skeptical of the process. But secondly, the 10-year in the Manson Act. We changed it in the Canadian boundary, and I see no evidence that that's endangering the fishing up there, or even if the Canadians were not living with the 10-year. I mean, my final question, can anyone tell me what the scientific justification is for a rigid 10-year with very limited exemptions? And if not, would you support giving the same kind of flexibility in the basic Magnuson Act that we have with regard to the Canadian border only stuff as well?
I don't know where it came from. The conspiracy theory in me is that it gives environmental groups the ability to continually attack the fishing industry and say we're overfishing. From a harvester, and I'm really concerned about the stocks. There's no reason we can't make that 15 or 20 years. As long as we're not going backwards, we're moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. The timeline is irrelevant. It's really whether or not we're sustaining or moving forward.
I concur. I've always said that the 10 years does not have any scientific basis, but neither does 15 or 20 years. So I think there needs to be some other mechanism.
Well, you think no one is taking this away from them. You're not put your Department of Agriculture. That's what you're doing. Well, you should call that the Department of Food Production. We didn't get a thought as a subsidy, at least it was. But what we would do, no one is talking about taking away the discretion of the department to say, wait a minute, it's too much fishing, we're going to run out of fish, we've got to slow it down.
And as far as the matching the Canadian model, those changes were made to keep us on an interactive basis with the Canadians rather than have them walk away.
I understand that, but with the Canadians not following the 10-year, were they depleting the stock to the point of non-reproduction?
They don't manage in the same way we do.
Were they depleting the stock to the point of non-reproduction?
The stock numbers are down a little bit, but
I'm sorry, were they depleting the stock to the point where we were worried about not replenishment?
were they?
The Canadians, the fishermen, look, I think the answer is really no. The argument is, we had to catch up with the Canadians, so we had to get into a situation where we didn't have the 10-year thing. They didn't have the 10-year limit, and no one is arguing to me that because they didn't have the 10 years, they were at the point where they were depleting the stuff. Mr. Cable.
I would agree with the rest of the panel that the 10-year rebuilding deadline is not only arbitrary, it's also auspicious. It assumes that fishery management is completely determinant of fishery productivity, and we know that Mother Nature has a large role in this as well.
I agree with that, particularly Cadron.
Well, that's one of the, what I plan to do, and I hope we get this, is to amend that 10-year thing. That's the key. If we can amend the 10-year, and that's more flexibility to them. I think a large part of this can then be resolved.
Constantine.
Thank you very much. I don't really think this is an argument about do we regulate it, do we not regulate it. It was well done. I'm almost positive that you didn't mean to refer that you really think the resource has to be regulated. It's all in the nature of the regulation and the enforcement and the openness that goes around, am I right? And Dr. Rothschild, the same thing with you on that. So I was impressed, Dr. Rothschild, 3 issues of enforcement, and we've certainly been beating that. Somebody said that beating a dead horse, so it was dead, we wouldn't still be beating it. But we're looking for answers on that, and we're going to continue to press, I think everybody on this panel is, about accountability and about making sure we change the culture to one that tries to get civil cooperation before you start hammering down the criminality aspect of it, and treating everybody as if they're guilty before they're found to be violating. The management communication part of that Rothschild, I agree with you totally. I happen to be, I guess, maybe the only one on it, but I think others may be inclined to think that way. That could change rapidly with the change in leadership. And I've argued that for some time. There has to be an urgency to this issue, and there has to be a certain empathy. I'm struck when you say, Dr. Rothschild and Mr. Wells, that maybe you want to change this to the Interior Department. One would think that the Department of Commerce would have more interest in small businesses and more empathy for them than perhaps you might expect out of Interior. So that leads me to that point of maybe it's the leadership within NOAA or whatever. There ought to be a change so that we get somebody in there who really does have empathy for it and understanding and wants to put some urgency into this and come down on the side of, err on the side of small businesses when there's a reasonable flexibility there, reasonable room to move on that than otherwise. And the last is the science and the assessments, and I think, you know, we've all talked about that, the need for resources. Senator Kerry's right on the button. You can't be, you know, whacking money out of the one end of the discretionary budget and say, gee, I wish we had money for that. So the other two things are technology and cost. The cost, Mr. Welch, you indicated that, you know, the industry's not ready to absorb the cost of monitoring, particularly days at sea or whatever. Is there a time period where you think the monitoring would rightfully shift over to the industry? Is that a factor of time, or is there some other factor involved there? Mr. Welch.
No, based on the allocations that small boats are given, we're very frugal. We've always operated. We do our own maintenance, gear work, everything we do ourselves. We cannot afford any more added costs to our business right now, the way it is with the allocations we have.
And is that an immediate issue, or do you think that will change over time, or do you think that's the way it's going to stay?
It depends where the science goes and how the stocks rebuild and all that. Currently, I don't see the stocks getting to the point where we're going to be able to catch enough fish to pay for this. We're all going to have to go out and buy bigger boats.
And I might ask this gentleman to the others, where's the technology on this, on the assessment issue and monitoring or whatever? Are we at a point where we expect there to be new technologies that are going to be helpful on that in the near future, or is this long term?
I think there are technologies that are not only being developed, are being implemented in other parts of the world. British Columbia, in Alaska and others, where we're using electronic monitoring, electronic recording, transmission, and also getting into the incentive systems of fishermen reported data. So the technologies are definitely there. It's a matter of operationalizing them and a willingness to solve problems from not only the council, but also from the regional office of NIPS and the Science Center to work together to solve these problems, use these technologies, rather than just maintaining status quo. And so there's no accountability in those parts. It's really the fisheries that are held accountable for lack of progress in implementing these technologies.
One of the reasons that fishery management is so expensive is because we've created a management scheme that requires high technologies. And so what we need to do is go back to more simpler management schemes where you wouldn't need an observer on every boat, where you wouldn't...
Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, for example, the reason for an observer on a boat is to monitor, of course, what that individual fisherman does, and it would probably be most likely have to do with discards. And so, so one technology that might have to do with discards is using video recording, as people have suggested. But really the right way to do it is to take a step back, look at what our budget is, what the requirements are, and develop a systems engineering approach to coming up with the best system, just like Boeing does with an airplane, or Lockheed Martin. It's as complex as putting a man on the moon, and we need to approach it from engineering and cost-effective point of view.
To follow up to your other question about examples of simpler, more robust management systems, we talked about striped bass here today. That was successfully recovered not through catch shares and catch limits, but through other management implementations that were more suited to the fishery and the data collection there. And we talked about scallops. That was not rebuilt under a catch share system. There was observer coverage that was suited to the status determination, similar to the 96 authorization of the Act and that requirements. Groundfish, we talked about the ending overfishing and rebuilding several of the groundfish. That all took place under relatively low observer coverage. It's these catch limits and catch share systems that require this more information. We can't achieve the mandated conservation objectives without this data-hungry requirement.
Thank you.
Congressman Katie.
Well, thank you, Senator. And I think it's clear that we're looking at a bumper sticker for days here in Hardin. One of those stickers, anyways, would be the fact that the science and data is slow, and as a result, it's not accurate. But I think this, from my perspective, goes down to something Senator Kerry said, that we have to incorporate common sense here. And I like fish. I really like fish. I hope there's more fish. I like jobs, and I really like jobs. My question is to Dr. Rothschild. You said we could create 1,000 jobs, avoid losing 1,000 jobs. Could you give us a little more detail? And can part of that be what I talked about before with the using the most restrictive, most conservative way of looking at this imperfect data? If we just looked at it in the middle, balanced approach.
Well, you don't have to look at it. I mean, eventually you will look at imperfect data, but right now, we know that 140,000 tons of fish could be caught without breaking any conservation regulations, but only a small fraction of that is caught because of the regulations. It is true that this relates to 2 or 3 species like redfish and haddock. But if we could come up with some schemes and we should be able to catch these fish, they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars that's left in the water. And those hundreds of millions of dollars translate into a lot of jobs. I don't know how many, but it is a lot of jobs. The other issue is in the governor's report, and Dr. Caven was instrumental in this. We pointed out that the catch level could be increased by approximately 30%. And we've never really had the kind of discussion we should have on that, but that would change 140,000 tons to about 180,000 tons. And so there's a lot of fish that are being wasted. And so if you look at managing fish as if you were managing a department store, you would want to utilize everything, not conserve it. So basically, there's hundreds of millions of dollars a year, to summarize, that would be available to the economy, but they aren't because of fishery management. And I have in my written testimony the rumor that the 2010 year class of haddock is bigger than the 2003 year class of haddock. And if that's true, we should be gearing up right now to develop mechanisms so that fishermen can catch those, because the 2003 year class is worth about $1 billion. We only utilize a small fraction of that.
With that, Senator, I have time left, and then this time I'm going to yield it back while I have something to yield.
Thanks a lot, Congressman. I really appreciate it. We're going to wrap up momentarily. Is there any? I want to ask Senator Davis to respond to a minute. He was commenting about the bycatch issue and Alaska experience. I think it might be worthwhile.
Just a quick comment to Congressman Tierney. You mentioned actually, that Alaska is experimenting with some new technologies in order to manage the fisheries much better. In some of it is video, some of it is electronic, and in some cases we've been able to reduce down bycatches and techniques that we utilize in there, which of course we think these will be helpful not only of course for our fisheries but around the globe. So I wanted to echo that. Congressman, there are some interesting ideas that are being pursued. I will underline this by saying one other organization within the federal government which is getting dramatically reduced is the one that expends money on its innovation. We have to be very careful because innovation is critical for us to manage these fisheries better. As part of that play is with our folks in Norway and the fisheries.
Thank you very much. As we wrap up, let me just make sure. I want to thank Sam Malaire from the Senate President's staff, and I also want to thank Claire Swarovski, Sean O'Neill, and Amy Kerrigan from my staff, and I want to thank the Commerce Committee staff for their cooperation and help in being able to come here today. Just a couple of comments, if I may, quickly. One, I don't know any fisherman who doesn't automatically understand, certainly with fishermen in Massachusetts, small fishermen, sometimes you wonder about the factory and fleet folks who step out of bounds, I think, sometimes. But I think the fishermen who are here, the ones who are struggling and fighting in that small business category that we're talking about here, there's one of them that doesn't understand the need to preserve the fisheries, keep the stocks, and that isn't automatically natural environmentalist, just goes with the territory. As we think about this, we have to reflect on the dynamics of our fishery, which is complicated. A lot of different kinds of fishing folks, with a lot of different competing tensions and interests. I know we can do a better job because, as a matter of common sense, we can find the sweet spot between preservation and protection and the right to fish. And you know, Barney and others are absolutely correct. I mean, there's no glory or rectitude in the automatic 10-year deal, depending on what else you do and how you manage. So I look forward to this next meeting, and I'm going to ask Ms. Cunningham, I think it would be healthy if we could ask the members of the Management Council to come, all of them, from other state likewise, and I'm going to invite all of them. And I hope that we can have, you know, it's not a speechifying event, but a real discussion of how we're going to break through here and make some choices. And this delegation, I know, is united in its willingness to fight with the Commerce Department, with NOAA, with NIMS, with whoever it is that we need to in order to leverage common sense. We all understand our obligations to protect the fishery, but we also just want to make sure we're basing choices on good science, good judgment, good input, good common sense. I would remind everybody here, some of the biggest challenges that we face are not the old fishing challenge, but the pollution / acidification challenge. Nobody here should underestimate it. The levels of heavy metals that are showing up in our fish is really alarming. Professor, you're nodding your head. And the danger of acidification to spawning grounds, to crustaceans, is gigantic. And it's already having an impact. So everybody here needs to recommit to efforts to deal with the climate change challenge that we're facing. And it is real with respect to our fisheries, enormously important. I don't know if anybody else wants to make a last-minute wrap-up comment to Senator Begich.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I just want to, I like when I do meetings and participate in meetings like this, I will tell you a couple of things I want to do as a takeaway. As Chair of the Oceans Committee, a couple of things I heard that we need to make sure occur from the first panel, maybe the second panel. One, from NOAA on what we've asked for a report on their communication types of fishermen, what they're going to do, how they do it. The personnel issue, we will follow up, and if it's a required closed door meeting, we'll do that. The fisheries management process, that recommendations, we've asked NOAA to give us a detail of exactly how they're going to implement those, what the process will be, or what ones they're not going to implement. The rollover issue, you've heard comments. The 10-year issue is interesting because I was saying something. There's 4 instances here that they exceed the 10-year, up to 41 years. So we have to look at why that is, what can we do to improve that, so it's not just an arbitrary number that someone mentioned here. And I guess I would extract again as much as I can, because I'm biased, of course, from Alaska. We think we do all these things right up there. But maybe there's some other things we can extract out of that and share some more with the New experience. But thank you, Senator Kerry, for hosting me. Thank you for the invitation to attend. It's an enlightening to me, and I will do whatever I can to assist in ensuring that as time goes on, that all the fisheries, no matter what the stocks are sustainable. And the last thing I'll mention is the other piece is a budgetary item from NOAA. How do we ensure annual stock assessments in order to do the assessments maybe, I'll use the word annual, but maybe a variation to make sure they are consistent and ongoing, so you have a good way to manage. And I'll leave it at that.
Yes.
And I'll pick up from there, and this is a plea actually part to our colleagues here for the state government in Massachusetts. SFAS is well represented here by getting to Ms. Rothschild. The federal people acknowledge their good work. I have to say that I'm very proud when we were still allowed to earmark. I will confess that I think that was very high in my list of earmarks, and I think that was helpful. I hope that the members of the legislature, a lot of this is federal, and I agree with the United, we bounce this back to us, but the state, the administration, and the legislature can help us by fully funding SMAS, because we need to have science. We need good science to fight what we think is not good science, and that means adequate funding for SMAS. So I'm going to put in that so you can acknowledge that those of us for the Massachusetts base of that responsibility.
Folks, on that note, we thank all of you for coming. We look forward to this next meeting. We'll get back to you. As I said, please, we'll put a pad over here. I want you to sign up on the pad, emails, telephones, stand for